Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu rasulullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to episode 2 of Back to the Fitrah, Ramadan TV. And I'm Catherine Jones, your host. I'm a spiritual and emotional resilience educator, mentor and coach, and the founder of Back to the Fitrah Academy. So here at Back to the Fitrah Academy, it's all about making sure that you master your emotions and have a really strong connection with Allah. And this episode of Ramadan TV will inshallah help you both emotionally and spiritually be on track and enjoy the best Ramadan ever in lockdown, inshallah. Don't forget to engage with me in this episode in the comments below so that I can see what you're benefiting from, what you're enjoying, and make suggestions, ask questions, share with me what you're taking away, inshallah. I look forward to reading what you share. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our Quran section. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 10 verse 57, O mankind, there has come to you a good advice from your Lord, that is the Quran, and a healing for that disease which is in your hearts. He also says in chapter 17 verse 82, and we send down the Quran, which is a healing and a mercy to those who believe. And in chapter 41 verse 44, say it is for those who believe a guide and a healing. So today we're going to take a verse and we're going to look at that verse from the perspective of our emotional and spiritual well-being, inshallah. Today we're going to look at Surah Al-Yunus, verse 62. Unquestionably for the awliya of Allah, there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. So how is this going to bring us ease, peace of mind, give us emotional and spiritual resilience in this time that we're going through right now, with everyone in lockdown and having a very different Ramadan to the one that we're all familiar with? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has basically said here that for the awliya of Allah, and we'll look at what that means in a minute, there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. I know many of you listening to this may have absolutely many reasons to fear or grieve. You may have loved ones who are unwell or at risk, far away where you can't see them. You may have lost someone that you love, may not even be from coronavirus, from something else, and there's reason to grieve. So why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say for the awliya of Allah there will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve? I've come to understand the way our human experience works. And one thing that is really beautiful about this understanding is that it puts into perspective what is happening right now. We understand that everything is happening according to the qadr of Allah and accept the qadr of Allah. And that there is no reason to fear what is happening or what is going to happen, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said He's not going to burden us with more than we can bear. So whatever it is, we will be okay. And when it says, nor will they grieve, what I have discovered is through this understanding is, yes, there will be times when there are people or things, moments lost that we grieve. But the grief is a peaceful sadness. It's not something that overwhelms us or takes us away from our duty to Allah, to our ability to continue to please Allah. It doesn't overpower us. So what does it mean to be the awliya of Allah? The awliya of Allah, well, what awliya is like the one that is close to Allah. What does that mean? It means we are constantly thinking of Allah. That's what it means if we're close to someone, isn't it? If we have a close relationship with someone, we think about them, we're concerned about them, they're often on our minds. So the awliya of Allah are the ones who are close to Allah, who are always thoughtful of Allah. In other words, in a state of taqwa, in a state of tawakkul. Basically, understanding the true meaning of in the remembrance of Allah, the hearts find rest, because they are always in a state of remembrance of Allah, inshallah. So I hope that this verse has given you solace, and that Allah's peace, love and blessings be upon you in this beautiful month of Ramadan. As the layers of troubled and stuck thinking fall away, what remains is our innate resilience, confidence, patience, and inner peace, our fitrah. Fitrah is an Arabic word that has no exact English equivalent, although it is usually translated as original disposition, natural constitution, or innate nature. The perfect embodiments of fitrah were the prophets Ibrahim alayhi salam and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Back to the Fitrah Coaching Academy is founded to teach the truth of our psychology, of how Allah created us. This is based on what has been named the inside-out paradigm, a subtractive psychological paradigm. Subtractive because it takes thinking off your mind, freeing you to have clarity, direction and purpose in alignment with as-sirat al-mustaqim, the straight path. So direct your face towards the religion, inclining to truth. Adhere to the fitrah of Allah upon which He has created all people. No change should there be in the creation of Allah. That is the correct religion, but most of the people do not know. Chapter 30, verse 30. Just like Newton's moment of clarity about the scientific paradigm of gravity, a man by the name of Sydney Banks had an insight about how our psychology works. This is not a philosophy or theory, it is a scientific truth. It is a very simple concept that has profound and extensive implications. As each individual gains deeper insight into the paradigm, their innate state of emotional well-being emerges effortlessly. This isn't something you apply to your life, implement into your life, or repeat until you believe it. It is something that you see deep within, because it is already there. There's no building, healing, affirming, doing of any kind, because that comes from the assumption that there is something missing, broken, or defective. The reality is you're okay. You always have been, and you always will be. It's just that you can't see that you are. How do I know this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear, in chapter 2, 286. Being patient with the first track of calamity is possible. Do not be angry is possible. Accepting the qadr of Allah is possible. Putting your total trust in Allah is possible. Simply by understanding your emotions, your own psychology. All possible by understanding one simple truth. We are living in the feelings of our thinking in the moment. It is a simple truth with deep, life-changing meaning. It empowers you to take responsibility for your own emotional well-being without the need for anything or anyone outside of you to change in the slightest. That is why it is called the inside-out paradigm. It all comes from inside. Every minute of your life you're experiencing life through your own thinking. Whether you can see that or not, that is the truth. I don't expect you to get that immediately, although you may. The choice is now yours. Do you want to know more? Have I piqued your curiosity? Do you want to live with fearless confidence, total resilience, effortless patience, and inner peace? Do you want to live in a state of taqwa, consciousness of Allah at all times, iman, deep sincere belief in Allah, and ihsan, living life to the best of your ability? The choice is yours. The three principles, or the inside-out paradigm as I call it, was first articulated by Sydney Banks, a ninth grade educated welder born in Scotland, living in British Columbia, Canada, in the early 1970s. I love to share the quotes and the wisdom from Sydney Banks so we can all reflect on the missing link, or that's what he would call it. Today's quote from Sydney Banks is, "If the only thing that people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world." Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu salam rasulullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Catherine Jones, emotional and spiritual resilience educator, mentor and coach, and founder of the Back to the Fitrah Mentoring Academy. And we're doing 19 days of COVID-19 live classes. Today's day 2, Be Like Water, Flowing with the Inevitable Change. So I chose water because water flows. And even though there's sticks and stones and other things that cross its path, it navigates around those obstacles. And that's how we need to approach what's happening in front of us, inshallah, and what's happening around us, inshallah, with the virus. So what prevents us from being like water? Why is it that we are stressed and anxious and we're not really going with the flow? We're finding ourselves, trapped in a lot of emotional turmoil, a lot of thinking, a lot of maybe fretful, panicky type of actions. It's all actually to do with thinking. So in video 1, I introduced the concept that we're always living in the feelings of our thinking in the moment, that it all comes back to thought in the moment. And that's going to continue to be my theme through these videos, subhanAllah. So what is preventing us from being like water, for navigating around the obstacles that we're experiencing right now? It's fear, stress, anxiety, a whole lot of things that really all come under thinking, which is what we talked about in yesterday's session. Futuristic thinking, like not knowing what the future is going to look like, and insecure thinking. Again, it's sort of not knowing what's going to happen, and not being able to have our usual routines and our usual way of managing and controlling things to be okay. So let me unpack those a little bit more for you. So let's look at the futuristic thinking, because the stress, anxiety, and fearful thinking is generally coming from either a fear of the future or insecure thinking, which are pretty much hand in hand, as we'll see. So who is in charge of the future? It's in fact Allah. And this experience that we're going through is an opportunity for us to actually assess how much we really believe that, and how much we have been trying to control or believing we have control over things, and therefore now finding ourselves in a predicament because we no longer feel that sense of safety or control or knowing about what's going to come next, subhanAllah. So this is actually a really good opportunity for us to check in and go, hang on a minute. I haven't actually been 100% believing that Allah's the one in control, because I've been trying to control stuff. I've been trying to manage how the future is going to pan out, subhanAllah. So let's look at the evidence. With him are the keys of the unseen, the ghaib. No one knows them other than him. He knows what's in the land and sea. No leaf falls, but he knows it. Nor there is a grain in the darkness of the earth, or a green or dry thing, but it is in a manifest book. Chapter 6, verse 59. Making it very clear here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge of everything, knows everything, subhanAllah. Has he knowledge of the unseen, the ghaib, so he can see the future? Here Allah is challenging us whether we can see the future. By implication, meaning that actually the answer is no.
We don't have that. It's in chapter 53, verse 35. And say, O Muhammad. So this is where in the Quran, Allah tells Muhammad to say something, the Prophet ﷺ to say something to the people. I cannot control any benefits or harm for myself, save that Allah wills. Had I known the unseen, the ghaib, I would have reveled in good, and no harm would have touched me. I am only a warner and announcer of good news for people who believe. Chapter 7, verse 188. Now this verse is a very powerful reminder, because if the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, because Allah has told him to tell us, that he can't control anything, he can't benefit or harm himself, and if he had had that knowledge, then no harm would have touched him. And we know the story of the Prophet ﷺ. He came to so much harm from the people, subhanallah, went through so much, subhanallah, that he's only a warner and announcer of good news for people who believe. SubhanAllah, what does that make us? So the future is in Allah's hands. It always has been. It always will be. And if we've been struggling with that, we've been living in an illusion that somehow we have some control over the future, that somehow we can influence the future. As far as I'm aware, the only way we can have any influence over the future is through dua, through turning to Allah and asking Allah. And Allah knows best how that all works. And it's one of those things it's best not to ask too many questions about, but trust that when we turn to Allah about the future and leave the future in Allah's hands, that the best outcomes are what's to come. SubhanAllah, if I'm trusting that. So do you actually believe that to be true? And this is where the problem falls in. We think we are true believers and we don't realize how we've got little gaps or holes in our belief. And this can be one of them, subhanAllah. Fearing the unknown future is not putting our trust in Allah. We're lacking tawakkul. Now, I'm not saying that you're lacking tawakkul as a whole, but in this particular area of your life and your thinking, there's a lack of tawakkul happening. We're not putting our trust in Allah, that Allah knows best, that Allah is in control, that this is all happening to Allah's plan. And it is all our own thinking, and that's all it is. It's just thought. The thoughts that we're having are the barrier to tawakkul, are the barrier to truly believing and relaxing and feeling that heart of rest in remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the future in his hands, subhanallah. So that our thinking is getting in the way of wisdom. It's getting in the way of us knowing wisely what's to do next. And that's a key part of going with the flow or being like water, is to be operating from a state of wisdom. If we're in a state of wisdom, we won't feel concerned or insecure about the future. We will actually be in this present moment and able to see what it is we need to be doing right now, which is what I talked about in yesterday's session. So that wisdom that we need access to is being covered by our own thinking and is available to us through that connection with Allah, because that's where the wisdom comes from. It comes from Allah. If we're trying to resolve everything in our head, in our intellectual thinking, it's going to be flawed. But if we are able to really connect with Allah, notice how Allah is guiding us, then inshallah, we are going to be working from a very wise state and have nothing to worry about, inshallah. So let's move on to insecure thinking, or a sense of insecurity. And a lot of people are experiencing a sense of insecurity. Will I get it? Will my loved ones get it? I can't go and see my parents. Are they okay? What if my children get it? What if I die? There's a lot of insecure thinking, right? So there's this need to know. I need to know how it's going. I need to know how many more cases there are. I need to know what's happening. Do we really? We've just seen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything. He knows every seed that's in the darkness of the soil, every leaf that falls. So do we really need to know? If the future is in Allah's hands, do we really need to know? Or can we just relax in the fact that Allah knows? Nothing is happening without his knowledge. And he is the one who is going to execute what happens in the future. And so it's by his will and his plan. And if he knows everything, isn't that going to be the best plan? So do we really need to know? Do we really need to control? Now, that is something that comes from insecure thinking, is this need to control. If you find yourself wanting to structure everything, organize everybody, have everybody on some kind of regiment, and turning into kind of a military sergeant in order to try and make sure everything works out, probably underneath that some insecure thinking about something. Because our need to control things, and that's a very controlling type of way of managing relationships and managing your household, comes from this need of control, comes from insecure thinking and nothing else. It's a feeling of, I'm not okay unless I know. So I'm not okay unless I know what's going on, what everyone is doing, when everyone is doing it. I'm not okay unless it's happening how I've planned it to happen. But now we're kind of going against what we just agreed about earlier, which was that Allah's the one that's in control, right? Allah's the one that has the ultimate plan, right? But we're seeing ourselves as not being okay unless we have control. So if you find yourself being a bit of a military sergeant, there's probably some insecure thinking underneath all of that. And it becomes very hard to let go. Very hard to let go if things aren't in a specific routine. Our routines are changing every single day with the announcements from our governments, from what's happening. So perhaps this is your test. Perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent this so that you can see for yourself this troubled thinking that you've got going on, this insecure thinking that you've got going on, that is actually flowing through other areas of your life and leading to you not working from a state of wisdom, but from a state of insecurity. SubhanAllah. So if you're finding it very hard to let go, there's an insecure thinking underneath. So what are you not seeing? What are you not seeing in that moment when all of that thinking is going on? You're not seeing that you're not in control, that you have no control, that this isn't up to you, that you're actually trying to do what is actually Allah's job, not yours. Your job is to show up pleasing Allah. Allah's job is to control. And not even control, because we have a very negative connotation of the word control. But Allah's the one who plans. And Allah's plan is the best plans. He's the best of planners. That's a much nicer, more comfortable and comforting way of looking at it. So let's have a look at that. Indeed, Allah alone has knowledge of the hour and sends down the rain and knows what is in the wombs. And no soul perceives what it will earn tomorrow, and no soul perceives in what land it will die. Indeed, Allah is knowing and acquainted. See? None of us know. None of us have any say or control over that. None of us know how much we're going to earn tomorrow, and that is a source of real concern right now. That's an area of insecurity right now, isn't it? A lot of jobs have been ended because of social isolation. A lot of people are having to rethink how they earn a living. And then there's a lot of uncertainty around whether you'll die or not. And what land you'll die in. Like, some people are stranded in places that they didn't intend to be because all the flights were shut down while they were in another country. So Allah knows. Turn to Allah. In the remembrance of Allah, do hearts find rest. Do you not see that Allah sends down rain from the sky, and we produce thereby fruits of varying colors? And in the mountains are tracts white and red of varying shades, and some extreme black. And among people and moving creatures and grazing livestock are various colors similarly. Only those fear Allah from among his servants who have knowledge. Indeed, Allah is exalted in might and forgiving. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us He is the one in control. He has the power and might. Our job is to be His servant, fear Allah, and gain knowledge. There's knowledge in there too. So what we're doing here right now is part of that. Such understanding how we experience life is a big part of the knowledge we need to be able to show up in a way that's pleasing to Allah. SubhanAllah. And indeed Allah exalted in might and forgiving. So if you are starting to listen to this and you're going, yeah, that's me. I'm so controlling. Oh no, that's really bad. I haven't been trusting Allah. I'm lacking tawakkul, and you've got all that thinking going on. Beating yourself up does not help. We're reminded here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a forgiving. He can forgive you, but you need to turn back to Him. And that's not going to happen if you're beating yourself up, because you're too busy beating yourself up instead of turning back to Him. So don't do it. All right? Don't do it. Trying to control is setting yourself up to fail. If you're trying to feel better by controlling things, you're setting yourself up to fail. Because of course you're going to fail. You're not in control. It's not going to work out the way you plan it. Sometimes it might to some degree, but a lot of the time it won't. And then you'll feel like a failure. It's not your job. You're setting yourself up to fail. And it's all just your own thinking. At the end of the day, the barrier to going with the flow is thought in the moment. That's all it is. If life feels like you're pushing a barrow of massive rocks up a hill, then something's not right. If life feels like you're going with the flow, there is an ease. You still might have challenges and logistics to work out, but there's a flow in there, and you can see Allah's blessings as you go. Then inshallah you're on the right track. But if you're pushing those boulders uphill, you've got some thinking that's going on that's making your life difficult. It's getting in the way of your wisdom, your connection with Allah, and your ability to show up in the way that Allah is looking for you to show up. In other words, you're not going to be passing those tests that Allah is sending you in the best ways.
It's just an automatic understanding that happens when we understand that our feelings are coming from thought in the moment at all times. That this helps us with showing up with neutrality, showing up with kindness, with compassion, with offering from a space of non-judgment.
You don't need to understand why other people think the way they think in order to let go of your reaction to it. I love the energy and the pretty much instant change, positive change in our lives that come from internalizing that realization.
My overall physical experience then changed. I felt happy. I felt, it's like, and my body felt good. Have a shower, and just like, wow, I'm moving really good. And then, then you're like, oh wow, you look outside, you go, oh wow, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. Whereas, I don't know, it was all of a sudden like there was a lampshade taken off my head or something. I don't really know how to explain it.
That I've taken responsibility for my feelings and for the way I interact with others. It definitely increased my trust in Allah. Having an intimate relationship with Allah, that was something that I had missed, I think, for the first few years of being Muslim.
But now, peacefulness has been the one thing that has helped me with my own self. with my husband and my son and my family. It's helped bring that connection back, which, before, it would have, I don't know what would have happened.
It's like seeing the light. It's like seeing all shades of yourself, like even the shadowy parts of yourself that you were never able to acknowledge or realize before.
What would they be missing out on if they didn't have this understanding? They're missing out on so much beauty that the world can give, so much love.
That I'm always okay, even if there is chaos around me.
I want for somebody else what I've got for myself. We should always want for our brothers or our sisters what we have for ourselves. And that is that inner peace.
Whatever you think your problem is, the inside out paradigm is a game changer.
I don't the be all and end all, it's pretty awesome.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Me First Revolution. Embrace the leader within. And I'm here with Raisa, who is someone who is the embodiment of embracing the leader within. When I first met Raisa, there were many struggles and challenges that she was facing, and very much had everyone else running her life. And now she's just taken charge of her life, and it's just been the most amazing transformation to watch. And I'm so privileged to have been just there with her through that journey. And now she's a high performance coach, certified through Brenda Burchard, doing amazing things. And I'm just really excited to have this conversation with her today. Assalamu alaikum, Raisa.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Catherine. I'm so privileged and honored to be here with you and just share with you. And I'm excited about this.
Yeah. You're always excited about everything we do together, though, aren't you?
I am. I love it. I love this journey that we've been on together, and how we're helping other people on their journey as well.
Yeah.
Definitely exciting stuff.
It is. That's the best, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why is it important for Muslim women to embrace the leader within?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think as women, we are designed and created uniquely. We are, as women, we're nurturers and we're givers, and we love to serve, we love to lead. It's in our innate nature. And women, you think about it, are the first exposure that children have in their life, and it kind of sets the standard and the foundation. So you have really a great opportunity as a woman, whether you're a daughter or a sister or a mother or a wife or an entrepreneur, whatever role or roles that you're playing, there is an opportunity for making an impact to help people along their own journey. And I think as women, we do that so well in terms of nurturing and giving and really creating an impact, starting with our families and the people who are closest with us, and working outward. Yeah,
awesome. So you recently did a TEDx talk which talked about your journey and your story, and I'm really curious today, having heard quite a few of your stories, which story you'd love to share with the audience today where you had to embrace the leader within, because I'm sure there's been plenty to choose from.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's been plenty to choose from, but what always stands out for me, where my transformation really began, was about 4 years ago. I found myself unexpectedly in a divorce after 17 years of marriage. And I was in shock, I guess you could say, devastated. And it was very reminiscent to me of how I felt when I was 16 and my father suddenly passed away, just feeling alone, abandoned. And unsure, insecure, and it felt like my world was falling apart, except this time I had 3 children that needed me to be present for them. So that's where my story began. And I knew, being a mother already at that point, one of my purpose at that time in my life was really to raise God-conscious children who can become independent, free-thinking people who benefit society with their talents and gifts. And that was so important to me. And I went on a journey myself, and I realized that what that meant was working on myself in order to help my children. And at that point, I felt like, I had relied on someone else. I always looked to other people to define me, to, give me permission to be, that when I got divorced, my whole world fell apart. I relied on someone else for my thinking, to make decisions for me. And now here I was left alone, and I felt abandoned, and I thought, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to turn? How am I going to get through life and then carry these 3 children with me, in whatever they're going through? And I think that was where I knew that I had to take charge. I knew I had to take some steps. And that is the point that began my spiritual and emotional rebirth, if you will, to create my own identity through that transformation of, being able to become an independent free thinker myself, to be able to really take charge of myself, to lead myself, and then therefore lead my family and the people around me and the people that I work with, and have an impact in society myself. So really, it was at that moment for me that I realized, look, I have to step up. I have to take charge. And having that mindset really changed things in my life, in terms of not relying on other people, but rather relying on the ultimate source, which was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for me, and not even creating. I had a relationship with Allah, but it wasn't where it needed to be. So I went through that spiritual rebirth, and that cultivating that relationship, my spiritual relationship with Allah, and relying on Him as the ultimate source. And everything changed for me when I understood that, and when I counted on that and relied on Allah to be my protector, my provider, my maintainer, my sustainer, my everything. Things started coming into my life. You came into my life. Resources started coming into my life that I needed to help me on my journey to cultivate my greatest asset, which is myself, the gift of life that Allah has given me, the gift of myself, my mind, my body, my soul, and my everything. To cultivate that, all those resources came into my life for me to take the action that I needed to.
There's one thing you said that reminded me, and really, I think it's a good thing to mention, because I think a lot of sisters do struggle with this, is it was actually really quite painful for you to have to make decisions on your own back then, wasn't it? It was just it was like the biggest nightmare to think that you had to make a decision, that somebody else wasn't making the decisions for you. And yet in this last 12 months, you've had to make some really big, powerful decisions in your life, haven't you? And you've just done that.
Absolutely. It was, you said painful. It was excruciating. It just felt like, I didn't know how. But, alhamdulillah, like, I'm so grateful to be able to experience that relationship with Allah, that I don't need to know everything. I can rely on Him, as you have told me before. Let Allah do the heavy lifting, and letting go of the reins and letting go of the control of believing that life has to play out the way I imagine, or life has to play out the way I think is the best, right? I mean, we all have all have in our mind how we view or expect our life to play out, rather than Allah's plan. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And that's where we get stuck in the pain, where we're so focused on I think this should happen to my kids, or I think that this should happen to me and my family, but it's not. And then when we hold on even tighter and tighter to our own plan, and we forget to look up and to rely on Allah and let go to fall into His plan, that's where the peace and the contentment come from. And yeah, I did have to make a really big decision in terms of letting my boys go, who are 15 and 13, letting them go and live with their dad in a different city that's about 2 hours away, and I only see them 4 times out of the month now. But being able to let go and pray the istikhara and make the right decision for them in what they need in their own journey in life, rather than what I wanted and what I felt was best for them, has given me so much peace and contentment, and has opened up so many doors for me. And I know countless doors for my children, because I don't know what their life path is going to be like, what experiences that they are going to need to help them on their journey. And I can't give that to them because they don't necessarily belong to me. They belong to Allah, and I'm just entrusted in their care to do what's best for them. So yes, I feel like, Allah has really helped me and given me everything that I need to make the decisions that I will need to make coming up ahead in my life.
So anyone who's a mum will really understand how big a decision that is to, let go of your children in a situation like that. And the person that you were 4 years ago would not have been able to do that.
Absolutely not. I would have shrunk. I would have become frozen. I would have lived in my head in all of the fears of what ifs, or, what could happen, where am I sending my children? Yes, they're with their father. But we have different views on how we live our life, and we have different lifestyles. And I would have gone down that path of, making up stories in my mind of what could happen, but I'm not in charge of the outcome, and I'm not in charge of what could happen. So this whole journey has helped me in terms of tawakkul and yaqeen, and knowing, hey, look, Allah has my back. He has all of our backs, and I need to count on that and rely on that. And that gives me so much peace, internal peace, that allows me to live my life fully in doing the things that I know that I'm here to do, and focus on that, and let Allah focus on what He does. Who He is the controller and the master of us, and of being in charge of the dominion of our world. And that has really helped me in terms of having internal peace and being able to approach everything in a calm, peaceful, purposeful manner in all things in my life. And I think that a lot of times as moms, we get so focused, our kids consume us. They become like the center of our life, and we have to understand and remember that we're not just here to be a mother. That's not the purpose that Allah created us for, just to be a mother. And that's a huge responsibility and a huge gift. But at the same time, we are first and foremost a servant of Allah first. And that means that we have to live our life accordingly in whatever gifts and talents that we have, and serving Allah. And that doesn't mean just motherhood. That means that, who are we as a person? We are a person besides just being defined as a mother.
It's a good point, because I think it's very easy as a mum to use the chaos of being a mum as the reason why, which is really an excuse rather than a reason, the reason why perhaps you don't open the Quran or you don't do these other things. But on the day of judgment, each and every one of us is going to be standing alone. We're not going to have our children or anyone going, hey, it's our fault. We were very demanding. We took up all her time. We're just going to be there by ourselves, accountable for what we did. So it's a really, really good point. And I think anyone who's listening to this, who's either gone through divorce and gone through struggles with where the kids live and all of these sorts of things that you've sort of touched on today, are probably going to be wondering, well, like, how can we do that? How can we have that
peace that you keep mentioning when our life seems so chaotic. So I'd love for you to share, I guess, just your golden nuggets, because I'm sure there's a wealth of stuff you could share with them, but what your golden nuggets are as far as how they can start taking that journey and embrace the leader within them.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Catherine, for that opportunity. I think I have a visitor here. I have the squirrel who comes and visits me every day on my wall, and he's always interested in what I'm doing. And he's just looking at me. Yes. So where to begin? I think first is understanding that life is a precious gift, and that what Allah has given you as a human being is your greatest asset. You may not believe it, but it's true. It really is. You don't have to look outside of yourself for any of your answers. I think understanding first that whatever you want, you can attain. And it starts from the self first. So starting internally, because we all face challenges, we all face problems. So first I would say is to really, really understand a couple of things. One is that you are your greatest asset. And that means, how do you treat your greatest asset? You know, do you take care of it? Do you nurture it? Do you invest in it? So your prized possession right here. And that, what I mean by that is, you know, your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, all of that comprise what makes you you. So are you investing in that? So heavily invest in yourself and your greatest asset in terms of all those areas, in terms of your physical health, your mental health, your emotional health, and your spiritual health. And then remember that there are the two most important relationships that you'll ever have is with yourself and with Allah. And that takes me to the two most important conversations that you have to have every single day is with yourself and with Allah. And I think that those have really helped me, and I know that it can help anyone else, because when you go to the source and when you look to the source, the ultimate never-ending source for anything you want in your life, you can go through life as a woman, which is your nature, of serving, of leading, of showing up with excellence as a nurturer. You can go through life in a state of abundance because you're getting everything that you need to be your best self from the ultimate never-ending source. And you don't have to show up with excuses or lack, or I don't have this, so I can't do that. My life isn't going like this, so I can't do that. I can't show up this way because of this, this, and this. And your life can turn from excuses into opportunities.
That's really, really amazing advice. And I guess people understand the conversations with Allah because we at least have those 5 times a day when we hit the prayer mat, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why I put it that way, but anyway.
It works. We get the message.
But I think what is interesting is the conversation we have with ourselves, because that conversation can actually hold us back too, can't it?
Absolutely. You know, we all have internal dialogue and that self-talk, and sometimes we're not always conscious of it or aware of it. And whatever we tell ourselves is what we're going to believe and is how we are going to feel. Because as you and I both know, that all of our feelings are coming from our own thought in the moment. And that internal dialogue is so important, because it doesn't really matter what other people say and what other people are doing or where your life is in terms of your circumstances. What matters is, how are you interpreting that? How are you translating that into yourself? What are you telling yourself? Are you counting on the opportunities that Allah has to give you, or are you so stuck in fears or lack and what ifs, or stuck in your head? Because our head is really good at making excuses and coming up with scenarios. Let's say for example, you want to go out and do something. You want to call a friend that maybe you haven't talked to in a really long time, and you know you had a relationship, but it's not where it is today, and you want to call that person. Do you instinctively get up and call, or do you play all these excuses in your mind, like, I don't know what she's going to think, maybe it's not the right time, or what is she going to say? All these things pop up in your mind, and we get stuck in our head, and that holds us back. Fears, made up stories that are not the truth. And how many times have you gone through an experience and had all this overthinking of what happens in your mind, only to realize that, hey, none of those things actually happened when you took the action? And how much energy, mental energy, have you expended on all that overthinking in your mind? It's a drain of energy, and it's a waste of time, and it keeps you stuck. So yes, conversations that you're having with yourself are so important, and becoming conscious of what is it that you're telling yourself, because maybe you've heard this before as programming, of how we have assumed certain things about ourselves and how we feel about ourselves in terms of what our value is or where our worth comes from. We have a story about that. What I would say is become more conscious and aware of what story you're telling yourself. How do you view yourself in terms of your internal dialogue? Because when you become more aware of it, you realize, oh yeah, I didn't take action on that because I thought that I wouldn't be good enough, versus those things are not apparent. They're subconscious. Most of our thinking is subconscious, rather than actually telling yourself, no, Raisa, you're just not good enough, so you're not going to go out and make that presentation. We don't talk to ourselves like that. It's just subconscious running in the background.
Sometimes, or actually probably most of the time, we're our own worst enemy, aren't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We hold ourselves back, and then we blame other people, or we blame circumstances or life events for our own actions or lack of action. Yeah, and that's so empowering when you think about how much personal power you have when you're not stuck in your head.
Yeah, it's very freeing, and I think it's been a key part of both of our journeys, hasn't it, to be freed from that thinking that is holding us back. And the key ones that, working with women, and you've probably seen it in our groups, is I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not important, all these messages that we've collected in our mind, that various things might have happened. People have said something's happened, and we've just collected them as more and more evidence to support these self-beliefs. And when they all fall away, it really is quite a wonderful space to be in, because it makes so much possible. And you're just living proof of that. I doubt 4 years ago you would have thought you'd be living the life you're living now, because you didn't know anything. And I say these things because I know there's lots of people listening who are going to have come from similar cultural backgrounds, or if not the similar cultural background, the similar kind of emotional background, where you're living in an environment where everyone is controlling you, or you believe everyone is controlling you. And it doesn't look hopeful. It doesn't look like it's even possible to live any other way. It doesn't look like you can make your own decisions. Not that you wanted to anyway. But the fear of making your own decisions was really more just fear of the unknown, because no one ever let you make your own decisions before. So you didn't have experience with it. So it was a scary thing to do. So living in that really controlling kind of manner, to then be, freed to just explore life and take it in the direction you want to go with it. It's amazing.
It's liberating.
It is. And just out of interest for the audience, because I think that it helps them realize how possible it is if they realize that the majority of it is just their own thought. Just out of a rough guess of what you were going through then, what percentage do you think was just your thought, and what percentage was actually reality?
Wow. I would say 99% was my thought. I would even dare to say 100%, because hey, look, I was going through whatever I was going through. but it didn't mean what I was thinking that it meant.
Mm-hmm.
I made that up myself.
Yeah. How cool
You
is
know,
that?
yeah, that's what I mean. It's so liberating. It's very freeing to know that, look, when you're making things up and you're living up here and you're making things up in your mind, you believe them. That negative self-talk, you believe that about yourself, because whatever you tell yourself, you will believe. And that's just a fact. And when you become conscious of it, the whole world changes. Your outlook changes. Possibility. You can live in possibility, knowing that whatever you want, whatever you can dream, the ultimate source can give it to you. So what's holding you back?
Yeah. So basically, it's really living in the abundance of anything is possible. Doesn't mean that everything we want will happen, because obviously we can have a plan, Allah will have a different plan. But we're much more accepting of that as well, because we realize that, well, our plan obviously wasn't good enough, so Allah had to tailor it to push us in the right direction. So we're not worried so much about that. But the fact that we can even open our minds and dream is amazing, when you felt so controlled, to actually be able to even think big enough to have these plans in the first place. Because when you're trapped in that controlling environment, you can't imagine anything other than what you're in.
Yeah. And it feels so real.
It does.
It's your reality, right? Your internal reality, but it's not the truth.
And so I guess what we can both say to anyone who feels like, oh yeah, sure, this isn't possible, is both of us have actually lived in a very controlling environment where it seemed like that was it. There was no way out, or there was no way forward. And yet both of us have now got really big visions of the future, if Allah so wills, that we just stand here as a testament that it is possible. And the first step, wouldn't you say, Raisa, is actually believing that it's possible? Because if you don't, nothing's going to change, right?
Absolutely. Like, that's where hope comes from, right? And that's where life comes from. You have to have hope and dream, be able to dream and live in possibility. Know that if you have a glimmer in your eye that something is possible, a dream that you have in your heart, know that it is possible for you. The one who can make all your dreams come true. Why wouldn't you get your dream? As long as you are doing what is pleasing to Allah, you're not going against anything like that, you can get anything you want. You can have anything you want if it's good for you. So dream. So give yourself that permission to dream. Don't hold yourself back and keep yourself closed, and give yourself that permission to think well of yourself and of the possibilities.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Jazakallah khair for sharing that, Raisa, because sometimes if it's just one of us sort of shares that before and after picture, it probably seems really unrealistic, especially to the person who's still feeling quite trapped. But the more stories they hear of the fact that it is possible, I hope, inshallah, that if there's one thing they take away from this journey of all of the speakers, is hope and possibility. Because once you have that, then anything is possible. Anything is possible, alhamdulillah, as long as it's what's written. But it's just amazing, alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and you know what? And dua can change what's written, and we know that when we make the dua and we take the action, because our job, I think sometimes we get stuck in, well, I wanted this, I dreamed this, and I tried for it and I didn't get it. We get stuck in that, and knowing that that your job is just to show up as your best self and do your best. The outcome is not in your hands, and the outcome is not, you're not in charge of the outcome. You're just in charge of your intention and your action. And that's it.
Well, that's what we're going to be accountable for. So good to be focusing on that.
Right.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, so we need to charge ourselves, to our mind, our hearts, our bodies, our soul. We need to charge all of that so we can be our best. Because look, being your greatest asset, we have so much potential, and we hear that all the time. Reach your full potential, reach your full potential. Well, that's your personal responsibility to fill and fuel yourself so you can reach your full potential and fulfill the purpose that you were created here to fulfill.
And you know what's so beautiful about that? Because I was fortunate enough to have someone translate Sheikh Haney Helmi's worshipper series of lectures, which was all about intention. And what he taught us through that series of lectures was that if you even sleep and eating and all of these things, if you make your intention for it to be so that you're strong and able to do more for the sake of Allah, then even your sleep and your eating and everything else can be an act of worship as well. So what you're talking about is a kind of a morning routine that if your intention behind it is to have the strength to live with ihsan throughout the day, to do the best for Allah throughout the day, then this morning routine, obviously it would include Fajr prayer and various things in it anyway, but the whole routine itself could be an act of worship, not just when you're praying.
Absolutely. But you mentioned it was so key. We have to set an intention for ourselves, because that's what we're going to be judged on, intention and action, right? And when you set your intention of how you're going to show up and what you're going to do in the day, that's going to really help you to get your mind ready to be your best self and, know where you're going, what you're doing and why, rather than just waking up in a lost confusion of, okay, what do I need to do today?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, and a morning routine is actually pretty good for knowing what you're going to do for the day, because sometimes we are overwhelmed by the number of roles that we play and the things that we need to do. But spending that time in the morning for yourself and getting on track can bring you clarity on what the priorities are. And then if you can focus on one thing at a time, it's actually surprising how much we do get done in a day. But when we get overwhelmed, Netflix looks pretty enticing, doesn't it?
Great escape. To feel more misery later on.
Yeah, doesn't work, doesn't help. Skip the Netflix. In fact, we should all just remove the app from our devices. I don't have time for Netflix very often these days, but I do remember the days where I'd get so totally overwhelmed and it would be like, okay, so what series can I get totally lost in?
Hey, I remember those days too. And like days would pass by and I would feel worse and worse about myself because I was wasting my time, wasting my potential, not being productive, feeling procrastinating, overwhelmed, and I still had the same list of things to do that I did nothing on. So yeah, I understand those days. Been there, every now and then I think I kind of fall into it, but then having a different level of consciousness now, you're aware of what's going on and what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, and sometimes you can actually choose to continue because you think, you know what, I actually need a mental break. I need to get out of all this, that it will actually be a good thing. And because you've actually made a choice to do it, it doesn't come with those horrible feelings either. And you also don't get stuck into the whole series. You might just watch one episode.
Right. You have self-control.
Yeah, that's right.
You're controlling yourself. Yeah.
Again, that's being a leader, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Leading yourself. It's the most important thing we can do. I love that quote by Gandhi that says, be the change you want to see in the world. And when you have to start with leading yourself. We can't lead anyone else. We can't do anything else or see any change that we want in our life until we make that change within ourselves. And Allah tells us in the Quran that He does not change a situation or condition for people, I'm totally paraphrasing, until they change what is within themselves.
Yeah.
Up here in your mind, in your heart, what you carry in your heart, how you treat your body, in terms of your physical energy and what you put in your body, your nutrition, all of that. Unless we start with ourselves and change ourselves, look into ourselves, nothing changes in life.
Very, very true. And I think we should leave on that note because we want to honor everybody's time. But it's the best note to leave on anyway, is it starts with us. And it starts with us taking charge and taking leadership. And your story, Raisa, is just like the perfect example of that. So Jazakallah khair for sharing with us today and being part of, I hope, an inspiration for many of the sisters that are listening, today. Alhamdulillah.
Well, yeah, so my pleasure, my honor to be here, to be able to inspire and share for more people and more sisters around the globe. Because, hey, look, I'll tell you one thing. I used to think, oh, she can do it, but I can't. Until one day it flipped. Okay, well, if she can do it, why can't I? So if I can do it, so can you.
Exactly, because we're nothing other than just your average everyday people, and we just decided to step up.
Thank you. That was my mail delivery.
Timing.
I know.
That's okay. We love bloopers and all in these interviews.
Oh yeah, it's real life, right?
Yes, that's right. Reality. All right, so I'm going to love you and leave you, Raisa. It's been awesome. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Each day on Back to the Fitrah Ramadan TV, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on, and then I would love you to share in the comments below what you come up with. Today's question is, what tends to distract you from feeling connected to Allah? Okay, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Salatu Salam Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So welcome to the Worshippers series. This is actually the second session in the series. It is worship. So we're going to discuss the topic of worship, inshallah. This is a series that was taught by Sheikh Haini Halmi in Arabic a number of years ago in Ramadan, and it was translated by Sister Alia Abu Al-Ala. She's a good friend of mine, and she translated it for me to teach many years ago, and this is probably around the fourth time I've taught this series, alhamdulillah. As we go through this is actually translated exactly the way the Sheikh did the actual class. And so some of the times we'll have his own personal stories, and sometimes, stories of the prophets, stories of the companions of the Prophet, some stories of, various people. So just so that you understand the context of the class, inshallah. So when we talk about worship, can someone worship money? Can someone worship their mood or their desires? What does worship actually mean? Isn't worship something like just prayer? So when we pray, we're worshiping, right? So people don't actually prostrate to money, for example, but can they really be worshiping money? Or if someone always follows their desires, does that mean they're worshipping their desires? Well, actually, yes, it does. First of all, the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that miserable is the slave of the dinar, miserable is the slave of the dirham, miserable is the slave of the cloth. So there are people who worship money. There are people who worship clothes, worship the houses, the cars, the things that they possess. So what does worship really mean? Didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, have you seen he who has taken his God, his own desires? So what is this concept of worship? What I'm going to do is actually ask you 14 questions. And I want you to answer every question to yourself. And I'm not going to tell you the correct answer right now, but the correct answer might not be obvious to many people. So have a think about each question as I ask them. Just answer them to yourself. You don't have to write them down or anything like this. And the notes will be with the recording, so you don't have to take notes of the hadiths and the Quranic references as we go through. Just mentally think about what your answer would be. So when you go to work, do you find your heart or do you feel astray? When you do your housework at home, does your heart feel heedless of Allah or do you feel close to Allah? When you sit with your infant child, breastfeeding him and changing him, and he really needs you, do you say, oh, I can't even hold the Quran anymore because of you? When you spend some time with your children and play with them, or when you take the family out for some fun, do you feel far from Allah or close to Him? When you sit and chat, not with our wives, but with our husbands, do you find, or even, our parents or our siblings, do you find your heart or do you feel unaware and heedless? When you go out and have dinner with your friends in general, do you lose your state with Allah? If you spend the whole night praying while your husband was asleep, remember these are the notes from the sheikh, so he's talking about his wife. Your husband was asleep. Would you say that he is not encouraging you or helping you to be obedient to Allah? If the Prophet ﷺ was among us now and they told you that the Prophet ﷺ was giving a lecture, could you go to work and leave the Prophet's lecture, peace be upon him? And if you did leave it, would you feel like you've fallen short on following the Prophet ﷺ? If the Prophet ﷺ was among us today, could you leave him and stay with your mother, serving her? Or would you say that she is restraining you from the way of Allah, holding you back from what is good? Which, in your view, is better form of worship? To be in service of your family, to help your husband? Well, it would be good if we were helping the husband in the kitchen, for example, turning it around, or to spend the whole night praying to Allah, being humble in front of him. Which is the better form of worship? Helping your family or being up all night worshipping Allah? Who is the better worshipper? Someone who prays the whole night or someone who goes to sleep feeling satisfied and content with Allah? Who will have a greater reward? A person who reads the whole Quran with contemplation and pondering, or a person who did like what Imam Shafi'i used to do and read the Quran 60 times in Ramadan, or 2 times as in 2 times every day, subhanallah? Which is greater in reward, to help someone in desperate need of your help, or to go and make itikaf, so seclusion, for 1 month in the Prophet ﷺ's mosque? So not just your local mosque, you're in the Prophet ﷺ's mosque doing itikaf for a whole month. Which has the greater reward? And who among these people would you consider to be the best worshipper? This is the last question. A person who constantly fasts and prays, a person who is a caller to Allah, traveling across the globe to spread Islam, a student of knowledge, always studying because Allah will raise those who believed among you and those who were given knowledge by degrees, a person who is kind and easygoing in dealing with people. So who is number one amongst those people? I want you to not stress too much, just what's the first thing that comes to your mind with each of those questions. So I know that some people, while I'm asking these questions, are saying, oh, we know what you want us to say. You want us to say that the man who's in service to his family is better, right? You want us to say, the women to say, see, the sheikh said that That's what worship is, that helping your family is better than praying the night prayer. You want to send us that message, right? And there will be people who will be arrogant in answering these questions, and there will be others who choose the answers based on their desires. But the answers will be from the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The answers will be from the biographies and stories of the people who understood what worship really meant. So you and I could disagree till the morning. Well, it's already morning here. To your mornings, our nighttime. You could say that the best worshipper is the caller to Allah. Another person could say that the best worshipper is the student of knowledge. Another could say that it is the one who's good to his parents. And another could say that it's the one who is kind and good to the people, and so on. Every one of us will hold our own perception, our own view. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us, enter into Islam completely and perfectly in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 208. The teachings of Islam are holistic. Islam came with Aqidah, a creed, a belief. It came with the Sharia, the doctrine, and it came with manners and etiquettes. All this is worship. So what does worship mean? Worship is not just a few rituals. Worship, as we agreed in the previous class, which you can watch after this if you're interested, inshallah, is everything that Allah loves and is pleased with. Anything that you say or do, whether it is a feeling inside you that you really feel, or speech that you express yourself with, any action that you do, whether you do it publicly in front of people or whether it is something in your heart that you just feel towards your Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what worship is. Scholars say that worship is achieved when you apply two concepts. Number one, total and complete love of Allah. So that no one is more beloved to you than Allah. That's why a person who truly loves Allah is a person who will really taste the sweetness of faith. Allah is three things, if found in a person, he will find the sweetness of Iman, of faith. One, for Allah and His Messenger to be more beloved to him than anything else. No one should be greater in your heart than your Lord, and no human should be greater to you than the greatest human, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Whoever loves Allah like this is a true worshipper, and whoever's worship exemplifies the meaning of love and humility to Allah like that is a true worshipper. The second one is total and complete humility and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what am I getting at? What am I trying to say here? I'm saying that the meaning of worship is the very accurate meaning. It's a very vast and extensive meaning. So let's now answer those 14 questions and you'll understand what I'm trying to say. Let's see how the Prophet's sallallahu alaihi wasallam worship was. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do some actions which maybe in our eyes would seem too little. Do you remember the three people who asked some of the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about the worship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and when they heard the answer, they belittled it? They couldn't believe that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam slept a part of the night, prayed the other, that he used to marry women just like the other men. They thought a prophet must abstain from marriage. And they couldn't believe that the Prophet ﷺ fasted for days, but it was also possible to find him not fasting for days. You wouldn't wish to find him fasting except that you would find him fasting, and you wouldn't wish to find him not fasting except that you would find him fasting. The Prophet ﷺ's actions were consistent and continuous. So what does this mean? Our mother Aisha described the Prophet ﷺ when they asked her, did the Prophet ﷺ used to specify certain days for worship? She said no. His actions were consistent, continuous. And who among you tolerate what the Prophet ﷺ used to endure? The Prophet ﷺ, the master of all worshippers, used to pray until his feet would swell due to the lengthiness of standing in prayer. The Prophet ﷺ used to remember Allah in all his conditions. And yet he ﷺ is the same person who would let a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, take his hand and tell him, come with me, I want to go to such and such a place. So he'd leave himself for her and let her take him wherever she wants. He's the same person who would go to diffuse a conflict between two tribes until the time for the congregational prayer has passed. So he would reconcile between the Muslims. He's the same person who told us, shall I not tell you which is better than prayer, fasting, charity, and enjoining the good and forbidding the evil? Mending the relations among one another, for corrupt relations is the shaver. It shaves the religion. So when it says that he left the prayer, it means that he missed the congregational prayer. We're not suggesting for a second that he missed the prayer time completely, by the way. He's the same person, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who taught us that the greatest acts of goodness or the greatest obedience to Allah is good character. And that the closest people to him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the day of resurrection will be those of the best character. He taught us that smiling to our brother or sister's face is a charity. He taught us that emptying some water in the cup of whomever it is requesting it is one of the best offerings and good deeds in the eyes of the Lord of the heavens and earth. He taught us that instilling joy and happiness into a Muslim's heart is the greatest deed. Therefore, worship can never be constricted just to prayer and fasting. Worship is prayer, fasting, being good and dutiful, having excellent manners and a good character, treating people in the best way. Worship has a much broader meaning. Now look at the Prophet ﷺ as he practically teaches us that helping your family can be the greatest offering. Just imagine this. The Prophet ﷺ, the one leading armies and building nations, the one who doesn't really have enough time for anything, you go into his house and you find him ﷺ holding a torn shoe, sewing it. Or you find him ﷺ milking a goat or helping one of the mothers of the believers in her housework. What's this? Is this worship? Yes, it is. The master of worshippers is teaching us that. I'll tell you a story that happened to the Prophet ﷺ and his wife's sister, Asma bint Abu Bakr. May Allah be pleased with her. Asma was married to the most jealous of men and the one of the 10 who was given glad tidings of Jannah, of paradise. She was married to Az-Zubair ibn al-Awwam. And one day when the Prophet ﷺ was on his way, he found Asma carrying a load and on her way to her husband to help him work. So the Prophet ﷺ, being as polite as he could be, says to her, meaning, you can come and ride on the animal and I'll walk there. But Asma knew how jealous Az-Zubair was, so she kindly refuses the Prophet ﷺ's offer and goes to Az-Zubair and tells him the story. The point of this story is that the Prophet ﷺ approved Asma in going out to help her husband in his work. He approved that she would leave her house in order to participate in her husband's work. I think I've got a little bit behind in my slides here. Here we go. Now I've caught up. Umar ibn al-Khattab used to leave the Prophet ﷺ's lessons and go to work. He would take turns with his partner in business. in going to the Prophet ﷺ's lessons. So he would tell him, today I'll go to the Prophet ﷺ and get the news and the revelations and the hadith from him. Then tomorrow it would be your turn and I'll go to work. Can you imagine that Ummah missed half of the Prophet ﷺ's lectures, half of his lectures, just so that he could go and work? And the Prophet ﷺ approved him and never told him off for that. He never said, Ummah, this isn't right. How can you leave my lessons and go to work? He never did, because Umar was in worship, because work is in fact an act of worship. Have a look at one of the greatest acts of worship ever. And this is good news for all of us who are mothers. And for those of you who it's still Sunday, it's Mother's Day, subhanAllah. So a good lesson for Mother's Day. The act of worship of raising your children. When sisters today are blessed with children or with marriage, and they start to manage the affairs of the household and time becomes limited, sisters could come and complain, we can't worship Allah anymore. We can't read the Quran anymore. There's so much pressure on us now. But isn't your obedience to your husband the greatest deed? If she prays her 5 prayers, fasts the month of Ramadan, guards her chastity and obeys her husband, it will be said to her, enter Jannah from whichever door of its 8 doors you wish. SubhanAllah, the only man who has been given this opportunity to enter through all the doors of Jannah is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But all of us women have this opportunity if we fulfill these conditions. Pray our 5 daily prayers, fast the month of Ramadan, guard our chastity and obey our husbands, and then we can have the choice of any of the doors of Jannah, subhanAllah. Or do you want to understand this according to your desires? Your obedience to your husband is the greatest worship by Allah, but the problem is that we don't know how to wait for or expect the reward from Allah. Didn't the Prophet ﷺ say, you are all shepherds, and each of you is responsible for his flock, the people under his or her guardianship or care? Didn't he ﷺ say the woman in her husband's house is a shepherd and responsible for her flock? Your care of your child, nurturing him or her and trying to raise them to be the best and pious child that would later supplicate for you, this is worship. But you don't just know how to expect your reward from Allah, so you have a problem in understanding the meaning of worship. This is the Sheikh's word. So in other words, we as mothers feel impatience. We don't appreciate that the running around and everything that we're doing for our children, even if it's taking us away from Taraweeh or taking us away from Tahajjud or taking us away from reading the Quran, that what we're doing with our children is in fact an act of worship, subhanAllah. So worship is a caring for our child and doing our best, to bring them up, subhanAllah. So the Prophet ﷺ also taught us that the kind words, spoken to our spouse is an act of worship. So when we joke around with them, when we take the family out and we have fun with the family, this is also an act of worship. The Prophet ﷺ said, you will not spend something seeking the sake of Allah by it, except that you'll be rewarded for it. Even what you put in your wife's mouth, or if you put it in your child's mouth, or you put it in your husband's mouth, even that little morsel or piece of food that you place in the mouth of your spouse can be an act of worship. Al-Hakim and Imam Ahmed narrated that, and this is a Sahih Hadith according to Albani, that the Prophet ﷺ said, would leave himself for Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, so they would jump on his back And if he lifted his head, got up from the position of prostration, he would gently take them and put them down gently. Then he would return to the position of prostration and they would jump back on. I'm sure every mum here has experienced that, subhanAllah. And when he would finish praying, the Prophet ﷺ, he would put each one of them on his thighs, one on his right thigh and the other on his left. SubhanAllah. My kids used to love, when I was in sujood, to use my back like a slippery dip. SubhanAllah. Abu Hurairah came to him and said, shall we take the children to their mother? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, leave them until they themselves started feeling like they wanted to go back to their mother, Fatima. And Abu Hurairah would then take them and return them to Fatima's house. SubhanAllah. So you see that our family is a part of our act of worship, subhanAllah. Talking to our spouse, spending time with them, anything that does not disagree with the teachings of the religion or anything that Allah loves is an act of worship. In fact, I heard a really interesting discussion by Norman Ali Khan a few days ago in his Ramadan talks, and it made a lot of sense to me. He was saying that unless you have the harmony between the husband and wife, in the family, then you're not going to have the harmony in the ummah, and you're not going to have Islam spread peacefully. And you might think, well, what is the connection with that? But it made a lot of sense to me, because just happened the same day, I was hearing stories of many of the convert sisters having, real struggles through marriage, and I have had my share of my own as well, and how our families have really got a negative impression of Islam because of what we've been through, through our marriages, because we haven't been treated the way we were meant to be. And so Norman Ali Khan's words made a lot of sense, that if we really want Islam to be seen the way it's meant to be seen, it really starts right back down to that husband and wife relationship. And so he was saying that in Ramadan, we need to be spending some time working on that relationship, spending time with our spouses and nurturing that relationship. And when you look at it like that, you can see how it is in fact an act of worship, because if at the base of the strength of the ummah and the spread of Islam is the relationship between husband and wife, which makes sense because that's also the stability of the family, which is one of the building blocks of our ummah, of our community, then nurturing that and looking after that is in fact really an act of worship, subhanAllah. So you see the things that we might be feeling like they're getting in the way or not appropriate or are wasting time, in fact, with the right intentions, actually become worship as well, subhanAllah. So there's actually this story where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he listened to a very, very long story where Aisha related about 11 wives and the stories about each of their husbands, and how the wives said good things about their husbands while others didn't have the best to say about them. And then the Prophet ﷺ sat and listened all the way through this, and then made a joke with Aisha that I am like Abu Zaria to Zaria, except that I won't divorce you. So Abu Zaria was the best husband to the wife among the 11 wives, except that he divorced his wife eventually. So the Prophet ﷺ gave Aisha the feeling of security and kindness, that any wife looks for in a husband by listening to her and participating in her talk, even if he might have not seen it as being mindful chatter, subhanAllah. So this conversation, this spending time together and listening to each other is an act of worship. The Prophet ﷺ used to pray at night and Aisha would be sleeping. I think we've got some of these things in the wrong order, but never mind. So the Prophet ﷺ used to pray at night and Aisha would be sleeping. There's a hadith that's considered sahih that our mother of the believers, Aisha radiallahu anha, said, I would be sleeping and my feet would be in front of the Prophet ﷺ while he would be praying. So if he wanted to prostrate, he would tap my feet and I would withdraw them. So the Prophet ﷺ never said, Aisha, why aren't you helping me be obedient to Allah? Get up and pray with me. So this is an example to answer the question about whether our spouse is neglecting their duty to us if they're not getting up and praying with us at night time. Here we are. Now we're up to the story about Uwais al-Qarni. The Prophet ﷺ told us about Uwais al-Qarni. Do you know who he was? The Prophet ﷺ described him as a very good and dutiful to his mother. And do you know why Uwais was called the master of the Tabi'een, the followers of the companions, when he didn't see the Prophet ﷺ even once? They said it was because he was so good to his mother that this kept him from going to see the Prophet ﷺ. His deeds were left to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he became the master of the sincere and pious followers. This is Uwais al-Qarni. In other words, that he put his duty to his mother ahead of him meeting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, subhanallah, and was known for that. In the two Sahihs, as in Bukhari and Muslim, it's mentioned that a man came to the Prophet ﷺ asking him for permission to go for jihad. But the Prophet ﷺ said, are your parents alive? And the man said, yes. And the Prophet ﷺ said, then go and perform jihad in them, as in go and look after them. SubhanAllah. So the jihad is in caring for the parents. So again, caring for family members has a really high status if you think about it being more important than going out for jihad. SubhanAllah. So this type of jihad has to be with the permission of parents because striving to be good and dutiful to them is greater than jihad in this case and is a greater act of worship. SubhanAllah. Look at how the Prophet ﷺ showed us to be the best one in worship, the one who consistently fasts and prays, the caller to Allah, the mujahid, the person who performs jihad, the seeker of knowledge. The Prophet ﷺ says, the best of you are the best to their wives. The best among us to his wives is the best among all the Muslims. The best of you are the best to their wives, and I am the best to my wives. SubhanAllah. How high a status is. It will be good, inshallah, if the husbands realized that they can invest a lot of time in us, inshallah, and earn great reward, inshallah. Who is a better worshipper, the man who makes itikaf for a month in the Prophet ﷺ's mosque, or a man, or woman, of course, who will help a needy person or sponsor an orphan or help out a widow or assist a student of knowledge or help someone who needs their help and stands by them in their hardship? The Prophet ﷺ said, to walk with my brother or sister in something that he or she needs is more beloved to me than to make itikaf for 1 month in this mosque of mine. SubhanAllah. See how much reward that is. I forget how many times the reward is for even one prayer in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you imagine itikaf for 1 month in that mosque, how much reward that is. So you find somebody out there who needs your help and you help them. You can earn that much reward or more than that much reward. Subhanallah. That is doable for each and every one of us. Subhanallah. What about, can a sleeping person be of a higher position in the eyes of Allah than someone who stands up praying the whole night? Yes, they can. Ibn al-Qayyim says, and listen to these words well, the dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, can accompany a servant who is in his bed or in the market, whether he is in good health or in poor health, and whether he is in pleasure and bliss or not. And nothing can prevail over all times and conditions the way that the remembrance of Allah can. So much so that maybe a person who is asleep in his bed could precede the one praying while being heedless. So yes, a person sleeping could be in a greater status in the eyes of Allah than somebody praying. Because if they went to bed saying all their adhkar in the remembrance of Allah with the intention of waking up to worship Allah, and that this rest was for the sake of being strong and ready and able to worship Allah more, that remembrance of Allah could be greater than the person who stood all night and they're drowsy and they're sleepy and they're not even thinking of Allah, they're just going through the motions. Subhanallah. So even your sleep can be an act of worship. One could go to bed with a sound heart, with a heart that is content and satisfied with Allah. Increase in content is greater than increase in obedience. For being content can perhaps be greater and heavier in the scales than praying the night prayers. Ibn al-Qayyim says that al-Manar al-Manif, that reading one surah with contemplation and knowledge and understanding and gathering of the heart is more beloved to Allah than reading the whole Quran continuously just for accumulating good deeds. That is so exciting for someone like myself who struggles really hard to read the Quran, especially in Arabic. To just read some in Arabic and then contemplate on the tafsir and understand it and work out how to implement it in your life is better than being able to get through reading the whole Quran without any understanding in Ramadan, which essentially would be the case. If I read the Quran in Ramadan from cover to cover, I wouldn't understand a word, but I would have read it. But what benefit did it do me? So it makes sense, doesn't it? One reading of the Quran with contemplation could be much better and greater than hundreds of mere readings without contemplation. The Prophet ﷺ told us that good deeds are multiplied to 10 times its like and to 700 times its like, and so many multiples. And Allah multiplies to whom He wills. Who then would read the Quran and get only 10 times the reward, and who would read the Quran and get 700 times the reward? In other words, the quality is better than the quantity. The one who contemplates and thinks is greater in status, because that's how worship should be performed. What did Allah tell us in the Quran? He said, indeed, we have made that which is on the earth adornment for it, that we must test them as to which of them is best indeed. As in, so the issue is who is the best in the deed, not who is the most in the deeds, who is the best in the deeds. Subhanallah. So the issue is who, as of this moment, will go to work as a worshipper, play with their children as a worshipper, and be with their family as a worshipper, smile at their brother or sister as a worshipper, even though they might not like them or agree with them, but still smile at them as a worshipper. Who will worship Allah by having a good character? Who will understand what servitude and worship of Allah really means? So here's the practical homework, and this is one of the things that he does in every class, is gives us something to go away to either reflect on or implement in our life, which is always great, because it's always one thing to get the theory, but the next thing to get the practice. Change the way you perceive and understand the concept of worship in your life. That is our homework. I want us to worship Allah by his name, Al-Wasi. The vast, the all-embracing, the omnipresent, the boundless. So really look at the all-encompassing acts of worship that are possible. Be variant in your acts of worship. Don't do everything in a routine. Don't just stick to a few acts of worship. Because you know what happens when we're in a routine? We become mindless. We're not mindful of what we're doing. I want you to get ready for the next class, which is going to be the golden rule. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik, and may Allah's peace and blessings be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and upon his family and companions. Ameen.